Hello there, Mad Mike here, and welcome back to the channel. And today we're going to go into a full review of the Netflix Witcher series. Now, when this was first announced, there were a lot of kind of concerns, especially with the casting and certain other things involving the story elements that were getting thrown out there by people that kind of had some behind-the-scenes knowledge. Honestly, I was a little bit concerned. I was a little bit concerned going into this. I'm happy to report that most of my concerns were dashed immediately, and there are still a little few hiccups in the series if you're talking about it from an adaptation standpoint. But overall, I really enjoyed it. And I'm excited to actually see a season two, and I'm very surprised to be saying that. I honestly didn't think I would like it as much as I did. Let's just kind of go through kind of the individual stuff, and then we'll kind of discuss the overarching story. And also, just a heads up, there will be spoilers in this. So if you do not want to be spoiled on the show, please do not continue watching this review. That is your warning. Now that we are all set with that, let's kind of go into the characters. And of course, the major character that everybody was really concerned with, or some people were really concerned with, I wasn't really concerned with it too much, is Henry Cavill as Geralt. And look, I think a lot of people didn't thought that he was a little bit too much of a pretty boy to be Geralt and this stuff and this stuff. Look, it's acting. And to be very honest, his portrayal is so spot on, it's almost like watching a cutscene in the game. And the only thing that I will say is that he's given a little bit of an English accent, which obviously because Henry Cavill is English, but it's not really, in the games, Geralt just kind of has that kind of gruff, low voice. But he doesn't really have an accent. But aside from that, he got the gruffness down. He got the dry humor down. He got like the speech mannerisms down almost to a T. A lot of people kind of criticize the costume. The costume is a direct rip from the games and what I presume from the books, because the books are this is based off of the first book in the series, from what I understand, or maybe like a series of them. But they're starting off with the books. They've said they're probably not going to go into the game mythos, but maybe eventually down the road that might change. But Henry Cavill hit this out of the park, as far as I'm concerned. I love his portrayal of Geralt. I think he's spot on. I think he understands the lore. He understands how the portrayal looks. He understands how stuff is supposed to go. He understands how this world works. It seems like he actually dug pretty deep into what a monster hunter type of what a Witcher does. And how Geralt specifically conducts himself and how he does stuff, because the way that Geralt is portrayed in this is kind of how you would picture him portrayed. How you would kind of picture him portrayed if there was a film adaptation or a television adaptation like this, where he makes it seem like he's in it for the coin, but in reality, it's one of those cases where like he has that heart of gold. He still fucks up. He still does stupid stuff every once in a while. He still makes mistakes. But ultimately, he still has good intentions, which is really what is kind of the core of that character. That's what makes him such a likable protagonist in the games and in the books, is that ultimately he's a good person when you dig down deep enough, and that's why he kind of shines through when compared to a lot of other characters, especially in a world where a lot of other characters are really horrible people. And like I said, the costume is spot on. The fact that because this takes place over such a long period of time, for Geralt and for Yennefer, the fact that they made so many scars on his body over time, and they just kept adding to them, and it's one of those subtle little things that you don't necessarily notice immediately, but in every kind of scene where you see him, when he has his shirt off, or he's in bed with a woman or something like that, you see that there have been scars added to him over time. And again, it's very telling, and that's kind of something that happens in the games too, where there's a lot of people that remark like, oh, you've gotten more scars since the last time and stuff like that. That's kind of a thing. And like I said, there's really nothing I can say negatively about Henry Cavill's performance. I think he nails it spot on in every aspect. Now, going to some of the other characters, so going to really who is kind of the next main character in this, which is Yennefer, who's played by Anya Shelrota, I believe is the actual name. Forgive me if I'm pronouncing the last name incorrectly. Um, Now, I had a lot of concerns about this one going in because it's kind of a race swap in a way, even though yes and no. And the thing is like, okay, when they started saying some of the behind the scenes stuff, there's a scene on the beach with a baby where, if you take the dialogue out of context with the episode and the overarching story, it makes her seem like, raging, horrible, horrible feminist. But really, when you look at the overarching story of the entire season, it's done very tastefully in the sense that it's not, just hammering this message into your brain. It's like this is an actual story arc for her. There's a reason why she has these views on life and stuff like that. And to be honest, that actual incident, from a story perspective, seems to spark her desire to actually have a child, which she can't. But again, we'll get into that. What again is something that seems kind of weird in this universe where you can literally conjure whatever the hell you want, but you can't regrow a uterus. But the overall, I liked her portrayal. And here's the thing I will say up front: I hate Yennefer in the games. I don't hate her in terms of the aspect of like, oh, I think her character was written bad or anything like that. I just don't like her. I think she's a bitch. I've never really liked her in the games. In Witcher 3, when you do that little side quest with her, I basically tell her to screw off at the end. I've always been more of a Triss fan, which is another thing that I'll get into, too, is what they did to Triss in this. But I never really cared much for Yennefer, but at the same time, this actress did a good job of kind of portraying that kind of bitchiness that Yennefer has, but at the same time, kind of balancing that out with a little bit of a softer side, and it works. And the other thing that I was kind of concerned about is that, again, Yennefer in the games is supposed to be, she's one of the most beautiful women in all the land and all this stuff. And the actress initially in a lot of the screenshots did not look like she was portraying that as accurately as maybe maybe not accurately, but not portraying, not, she didn't really look like a supermodel, let's just put it that way. They clean her up a lot in this show in terms of that, because a lot of those screenshots are from periods of time where, like, it's right after a battle or something like that. There's not a whole lot of right after you just got out of like a brutal battle. It's kind of weird to see like, oh, you still look like you just walked out of the makeup room. That's not accurate. So when she is kind of all dressed up and she's doing her thing and she's strutting about, she has that feel and it works. Now, like I said, they do have a little bit of that kind of feminist identity, but it gets lost in the story. It's not an overbearing message. It's very subtle, if anything, and even then, it's really not even there at the end of the first season. You're really concentrating on other stuff. A lot of that has to do with her story arc early on, which again makes sense given where she comes from. And I will say this: Yennefer, I think, has the most complete story arc in the entire show, even more so than Geralt, because Geralt, even though he changes, it's far more subtle. And when we meet Geralt, we meet him when he's already a Witcher. We don't really know what his past is, at least at the beginning. We get a little bit of a glimpse of it at the end of the season. But Yennefer, we kind of know the whole spectrum by the end of it. She's the character that we kind of know inside and out. I'm not saying that in a bad way, because again, they kind of split things up pretty evenly between the main three characters, which are Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri. Like I said, I think she does a very good job. I think that she is extremely attractive, especially when she has her clothes off. But the whole thing with her in the show is very well done, and I like the writing and I like the overarching story, and it makes sense. It is not sloppily written, which is another thing I was kind of concerned about going into this. Now, going down to the third major character, we have Freya Allan as Ciri. Now, again, this was one that was kind of marred with a little controversy when the show first got announced, because a lot of people were saying, because the casting call had originally called for possible Asian or black actresses to play her, and there was a little bit of a backlash, and then ultimately Freya Allan was cast. And again, I think she does a perfect job at Ciri. I think she portrays that kind of child, kind of on the verge of becoming a teenager type of thing. I believe she's supposed to be 12 or 12 or 11 or something like that. Maybe a year older in the actual series when we meet her. And the other thing is she has the most cohesive line of storytelling, because her story is kind of all of it's immediate. With Geralt and Yennefer, they jump around a little bit. And it's one of those things that's kind of like, okay, like, because we don't really get too much clarification about how much time has gone by in certain aspects of the show. It's not like, oh, they flash to this time and there's a little title card that says when this is and yada yada yada. It's like, okay, you kind of just have to adapt and figure out, like, okay, this is happening then, this is happening then, this is happening then, or this is in between this event and stuff like that. There's not a whole shit ton that they actually do with this, where they tell you kind of where things are placed, but by the end of the series, everything kind of winds itself up into a nice, neat little bow, and everybody's kind of operating on the same time frame, which is correct. Which is, ideally what you want to do, and then leading into season 2. So, like I said, Ciri, perfectly fine. The actress does a really good job, I think, at portraying her type of character. Again, this is very early on in her life, so this is way before we meet her in any of the games. And you get kind of a flashback of this in Witcher 3, where you get to see her at Kaer Morhen. But like I said, there's not a whole lot there, but she does a really good job at kind of portraying that kind of scared girl character. They don't give her too much depth, other than the fact that, she sneaks out of the castle and, she plays games with people in the street and she's supposed to be hidden. And they do hint at her powers, which is, she has this like almost Sonic type of scream type of thing, which is apparently a hereditary thing that happens in her family. I guess it skipped her grandmother, but her mother had it and her great grandmother had it. But ultimately, I think she did a really good job. Now, going down the list, the secondary characters are really where we start to get into stuff that's kind of, I don't want to say blasphemous, but they definitely played around with it to a pretty decent extent. Now, most of these that I'm going to list are going to be, they're mostly characters that have to do with the sisters, the witches and stuff like that, the mages. And let's go with Frangilla first, because that's definitely the most obvious one. And Frangilla in the games and in the books was white. They've changed her completely over into a black actress who's Mimi Nedewane. I believe that's how that's pronounced. I could be wrong. But they've completely changed that over. And she doesn't really get that much development over the series, is the other thing, even though at the end she's kind of like the main antagonist, which I think is kind of strange in terms of that kind of escalation of a character. The Nilfgaardians in general are kind of the enemies for the entire season, which again makes sense because it's Nilfgaard if you know the lore of the series. But she's kind of introduced as kind of this main antagonist in the last couple of episodes, when they're having this siege at this castle that's with all the she's fighting all the she's with the Nilfgaardians, and she's fighting all of her sister witches and mages who have their own little army that's trying to defend this fortress until reinforcements arrive. And she comes off as a complete bitch, which I get it. Again, you're supposed to have an unlikable character, so it makes sense. But at the same time, it kind of shows the problems that they have with the whole sisterhood idea. Now, just as far as the lore of the series goes, basically the idea is that there are court mages that get assigned to them, and those mages work for kind of like a centralized, almost like an Illuminati type of organization, and basically they are supposed to kind of keep all the powers of the world in check. Now, what Frangilla did is she said, fuck it, and she said, okay, Nilfgaard, you're better than everybody else, let's just take over the entire world. So Nilfgaard just then started invading kingdoms, and that's where we get the beginning episode, where we get the their kingdom. So now Frangilla is kind of the one that's, I wouldn't say she's manipulating the situation, but she's definitely encouraging it. And we kind of see that there. And then the other one that is, I think, even worse. Well, I wouldn't say it's worse. It's worse in terms of the representation. Is Anna Schafer as Triss. Now, Triss does not come up a lot in the first season. She reoccurs in a couple episodes. She meets Geralt first, and then, or we meet her first with Geralt, and then later on she shows up in the last few episodes with Yennefer. And the thing with Triss is that Triss, in the books and in the games, she's supposed to be a redhead, and again, she's I would argue that she is actually more attractive than Yennefer is. In this, Anna Schafer, I don't think she is anywhere near attractive enough to be playing the character. Or actually, I shouldn't say that. I think she probably is, but maybe they just didn't do a very good makeup job on her. A lot of the things that we see her in are kind of battle related sometimes. But again, I feel like this would have been better too if you had dyed her hair red, which they didn't do. They just let her go out with her normal brunette hair, which I think is a very big mistake. And it's also kind of weird because there's another redhead that kind of bites the dust. That's becoming a weird trend now. But I think that Anna Schafer may have been a better pick if you had done better job with the makeup. And if you had dyed her hair red just to match the character, because again, Henry Cavill wears a white wig. He's not running around. He has black hair normally. He's not running around just normally with really long black hair. He has the white hair that Geralt has. Even Ciri has the white hair that she's supposed to have, or the very, very like platinum blonde hair that she's supposed to have. So it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. When you look at it from that perspective of why they wouldn't have just dyed her hair red. Again, she's only in it for 3 episodes. She's in the 1 episode with Geralt, and she's in the 2 end episodes. And really, in the 7th episode, she doesn't really show up a whole lot. But, again, it feels like something that maybe you could have done. And again, the witches can kind of change their physical appearances and stuff like that. So maybe they'll change it up for season 2. I kind of hope they do. Again, I'm not familiar with the lore, as familiar with the lore of the books. But if maybe Triss starts out that way and then she becomes a redhead later on, it's possible, but I don't know. But the thing is that I think that was a bad mistake on them to not do that. But going into more stuff, so that kind of covers the main characters of the show for the most part. There's not really a whole crap ton of... They don't really do a whole lot of characters in this show. There's more stuff to do in terms of just kind of exploring the characters that we have, which again I think is a very good thing when you're starting out a series. Is you need to have these characters built from the ground up at the beginning, and you need to develop them, and then in season 2 you can go into more of the actiony stuff, and you can keep evolving the characters as you go. But this is a very character-driven show, and I will say that to anybody out there who's kind of looking for nonstop action, you're not going to get it with this show. There is action in the show. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of action in the show, but you're not going to get balls to the wall action every single episode. There's going to be episodes where it's just character development, and that might just be it. Okay, there's a few slow episodes in there, but again, they're not wasteful episodes, and that's what I hate. I hate fluff. Fluff is the bane of a television show, at least in my eyes. If you can cut it out, if you can cut something out, and it doesn't affect the characters in any way, shape, or form, or the story in any way, shape, or form, then it doesn't need to be there. And in this show, I don't think you really have that for the most part. I think a lot of the stuff that happens to these characters, at least for the most part, is all the stuff that happens to these characters and all the stuff that we see in the show, the interactions and everything like that, they all have some kind of meaning to the characters and the progression of the story and the progression of themselves. Because the thing is that the other thing that I always kind of disliked was that you in terms of television shows, is that you kind of go off on these tangents. You really don't pay attention to the main plot line. The main plot line is Geralt and Ciri coming together, and then Yennefer, I guess, coming together as well. And really, we kind of see the progression of those events throughout the series of them coming together. And when you realize where the timelines lie when we follow each of the characters, then you kind of realize like, okay, that we're going through the background stuff and we're setting everything up. So it's a bit of an exposition dump, but it's a good exposition dump because it gives you the backstory. It tells you why Ciri is out to search for Geralt of Rivia. It tells you why Geralt needs to protect her. It explains why Geralt and Yennefer have this connection that they have. And there's a lot of stuff in there that is really, really good. And like I said, even the actresses that I don't really think fit the roles from a physical perspective, they still did a relatively good job. Again, except for Frangilla, that was just kind of like that woman acted like a board. But everybody else kind of had the right idea. They had the lore. It's obvious they had read about their own characters and they knew what they were doing. And like I said, really, if you're going from a plot perspective, I think Yennefer had the best plot in the show. I think Geralt has the second best arc, at least in terms of completing it. But again, I think Geralt has the more interesting one because he is fighting a fair amount of monsters in this. And I thought that was something they might take a little bit of a backseat. But for the most part, they don't. They actually let it keep going. And when you actually get to see him fight the monsters and stuff and how he prepares and what's going on, it feels a lot like when you prepare for monster fights in the games, which is really, really good. I do enjoy that. And they do show actually a fair amount of monsters in the show too. You have, I know in the trailers you get to see the spider creature. There's a few other ones that he takes out that are prominent in the games as well. And again, they don't overuse it to the extent that it's like, okay. And some of the CGI is a little questionable here and there, but again, it's a television show. I expect certain things from it. So if the CGI is not like, triple A 100% quality level, I can live with it as long as it's passable, and it is passable for the most part. Some of it is actually very good. But they do use practical effects for the most part when they're doing the fight scenes and stuff like that. And like I said, the costume design, Geralt is perfect. Yennefer has a very good costume design. Ciri has a very good costume design, as do some of the other, sorceresses and stuff like that. The Nilfgaardians look a little weird. It looks kind of like somebody shrink wrapped them in armor, so they look kind of strange, especially compared to what they look like in the games. So, again, that might just be my aesthetic, choice bleeding through, but I think that could have left a little bit to be desired. Maybe they'll change that moving forward a little bit, but ultimately, I think the series is really, really good. I would recommend that you watch it, especially if you're a fan of the books or the games, because it doesn't tread on any of those. It doesn't give a middle finger to fans like some franchises do these days. It honors the lore, it honors the story, and it treats the characters correctly, and that's really what you want out of something like this. So I would give this a watch. Now, I don't know if anybody else out there has watched this as well. If you have, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you and didn't you like? Again, leave your thoughts down there. Hit the bell for notifications, hit the like button, subscribe, and remember, I live my life free of compromise. Do you?